For as long as I could remember, I had dreamed of owning a classic muscle car. Not just any car, but a 1967 Ford Mustang Fastback, candy apple red. Shining chrome, deep rumble from its V8 engine. It wasn't just a vehicle to me, it was a symbol of years of hard work and sacrifice. After 5 years of saving, sacrificing weekends, working overtime, and living frugally, I finally bought my prize, a fully restored Mustang worth $56,000. The day it arrived, I stood there for what felt like hours, admiring every curve, every polished surface, the pristine condition that only few could appreciate. I wasn't just a car enthusiast, I was in love. At the same time, I had also moved into my new home, a cozy 2-story house in the Westwood Lakes community. Beautiful manicured lawns, picture-perfect white fences, neighbors who waved politely. It felt like I had finally achieved the American dream. Little did I know, this dream was about to turn into something far more sinister. For the first few weeks, everything was perfect. I kept my Mustang in the driveway, covered when not in use, sparkling clean and well-maintained. I took it out for weekend drives, and every now and then, neighbors would glance at it admiringly, or so I thought. Then, the first letter came. It was from the Westwood Lakes HOA, the Homeowners Association. A simple envelope with a cold, formal message inside. Notice of violation. Your vehicle violates HOA guidelines. Non-operational, classic, or project cars are prohibited from driveway storage. I stared at it, confused. My car was not non-operational. It was fully registered, insured, and in better shape than half the cars in the neighborhood. I thought it must have been a mistake. I immediately sent the HOA office an email with full documentation, registration papers, insurance documents, even a signed statement from my mechanic certifying that the vehicle was in perfect working order. The next day, another notice appeared, more aggressive this time. Unapproved vehicle modifications and storage are negatively affecting the neighborhood aesthetics and lowering property values. Failure to comply may result in daily fines. Now I was angry. I decided to visit the HOA office in person. That's when I met her, Karen Whitmore, the HOA president. She sat behind her oversized mahogany desk, wearing a stiff smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her office was lined with HOA rulebooks, neatly stacked folders, and community award plaques, all giving her an air of authority she clearly enjoyed. She didn't even bother looking at the documents. I brought. Mr. Lewis, she said with a syrupy tone, we have strict community guidelines. These rules exist to preserve the property values for all our residents. Your car, while sentimental to you, does not fit the image we maintain here. It's a collector's item, I argued. It's fully functional, completely legal, and adds value, not harm. Her smile thinned. Either move it into your garage or face daily fines. The problem was my garage wasn't available. It doubled as my mechanical workshop. There simply wasn't space for the Mustang inside. Still, I compromised. I bought a custom-fitted car cover, kept the driveway spotless, and filed a formal appeal. It didn't matter. The very next day, another violation notice arrived. This time, it included a fine, $150 for non-compliance, and then it became a daily, routine warning letters, increasing fines, legal threats. My appeals were ignored. My phone calls went unanswered. The friendly neighborhood I thought I had joined began to feel more like a trap. And then, one evening, I returned home from work to find my driveway empty. My Mustang was gone. No theft, no break-in, just ... gone ... and taped to my front door was another HOA notice. Vehicle removed per HOA Code 7.3. Unauthorized storage and non-compliance. Contact HOA enforcement for details. I stood there, frozen. That was the moment I realized, this wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was war. I stood there for several minutes, staring at the empty space where my Mustang had been. The weight in my chest was crushing. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, or rather, what I wasn't seeing. My pride and joy was gone, vanished. But this wasn't a theft. There were no shattered windows, no tire marks, no signs of forced entry, just a neatly folded notice taped to my door like some sick joke. Vehicle removed per HOA Code 7.3, unauthorized storage and non-compliance. Contact HOA enforcement for details. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone and called the HOA number listed on the notice. After several rings, a cold, robotic voice answered. Westwood Lakes HOA enforcement. How may I help you? This is Brian Lewis. You illegally towed my vehicle. Where is my car? The voice paused for a moment, then replied flatly, your vehicle has been relocated to the authorized impound facility due to repeated violations. You may retrieve it upon payment of outstanding fines and towing fees. I gritted my teeth. How much? Currently $2,450, the voice said. Additional charges will accrue daily until the balance is paid. $2,450. For towing a car, a few miles? This wasn't enforcement, this was extortion. The next morning, I drove to the address they provided. It was a run-down, fenced lot tucked behind an industrial park. Old rusted vehicles were stacked like discarded appliances, and there, wedged between two dented pickup trucks, was my Mustang battered, scratched, and coated in grime. Deep scratches ran across the hood where careless chains had dug into the paint. My stomach churned. The pristine $56,000 showpiece I had poured my life into was now scarred by incompetence and greed. I stormed into the office on site. A bald man with greasy hands and a half-eaten sandwich barely looked up from his desk. You the owner of that Mustang? He asked, wiping his mouth. Yes, and I want to know who authorized this and why it's been treated like junk. HOA ordered the tow, he said with a shrug. We just do what we're hired to do. Pay the fees and you can take your car. I slammed my paperwork on the desk, registration, insurance, photographs of its pristine condition, even the appeal letters I had filed with the HOA doesn't matter to me, he said casually. Talk to the HOA if you've got a problem. But then something caught my eye. A small nameplate on his desk read, Whitmore Recovery Solutions. Whitmore, the same last name as Karen. Whitmore, the HOA president. My pulse quickened. Is this your company? I asked, forcing my voice to remain steady. The man grinned slightly. Family business. So that's how they played it. Karen wasn't just enforcing the HOA rules, she was profiting directly from them. She'd created her own private towing company to collect massive fees off homeowners she targeted. It was corruption hiding in plain sight. I left the impound lot without paying. I wasn't about to feed into her little scheme. Instead, I went home and started digging. Hours of online research led me to county business records, and there it was. Clear as day, owner Karen Whitmore. Business license. Whitmore Recovery Solutions. The woman leading the HOA was using her position to funnel money into her own business, abusing her authority to target residents like me. But, before I could make my next move, another bombshell dropped. 2 days later, I received a letter in the mail. Thick, official, stamped with court markings, Westwood Lakes HOA versus Brian Lewis. They were suing me. The charges: creating public nuisance, lowering neighborhood property values, HOA harassment, and refusal to comply with community guidelines. My jaw tightened as I read the accusations. They were trying to break me financially to bury me in legal fees, force me to sell my home, and silence me completely. But if Karen thought I was going to back down, she had just made a very dangerous mistake, because I was ready for war. I sat at my kitchen table, the lawsuit papers spread in front of me like a crime scene. The charges were absurd. Karen Whitmore and the HOA were accusing me of lowering property values, violating aesthetic standards, creating a nuisance, and even harassing them. They were trying to crush me, not just financially, but mentally. They wanted me to break. But they underestimated me. The first thing I did was call a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but Michael Grant, a well-known HOA litigation attorney with a reputation for ripping corrupt associations apart. When I explained my situation and laid out the documents, the impound receipts, the HOA violations, the business ownership records, he let out a low whistle. Brian, this isn't just a civil matter. This smells like racketeering. Racketeering. The word sent a surge of energy through me. This was no longer just about my car. This was bigger. This was systematic abuse of power, and I had proof. Michael wasted no time. He filed a countersuit against the HOA and Karen, personally accusing them of abuse of authority, illegal towing, conflict of interest, fraud, extortion, and property damage. That's when things started to heat up. Within days, Karen's perfect little world began to crack. HOA board members started receiving subpoenas. The county clerk's office received requests for financial disclosures. And suddenly, the HOA's attorney, a smug man named Stanley Price, called for an emergency mediation. We met at a downtown law office, both sides sitting stiffly across from one another. Karen sat there with her arms crossed, her lips pressed tightly together. She still carried that air of superiority, as if she believed her HOA shield could protect her. Michael opened, strong. We have documented proof of illegal towing operations connected to the HOA president's privately owned business. We have evidence of fabricated violations, improper fees, and property damage exceeding $15,000. Stanley shifted uncomfortably, but Karen interrupted him. Mr. Lewis refused to comply with community standards. He brought this on himself. Michael slid a folder across the table. Here are photographs of Mr. Lewis's vehicle, fully operational, clean, and compliant. Here are the appeal letters you ignored. And here is a copy of your business license, Ms. Whitmore, showing you own the towing company that profited directly from the violations you issued. Karen's face twitched for the first time. Michael leaned forward. You abused your authority for personal financial gain. That's a serious offense. You're facing potential criminal charges and personal liability. The room went cold. Stanley tried to salvage the situation. Perhaps we can discuss a settlement, but I wasn't ready to back down. No deal, I said firmly. I want my car restored. I want every fine reversed. And I want the HOA to admit fault publicly. Karen's icy mask slipped for a moment. I saw fear flash in her eyes. The mediation ended without agreement. They wanted to negotiate, but I wanted justice. The next day, as if to intimidate me, I received a certified letter from the HOA stating that they were accelerating foreclosure proceedings on my home for unpaid fines. They were doubling down, but so was I. Michael smiled when I showed him the letter. Perfect, they just handed us more evidence of malicious intent. We were heading to court, and now, I was holding the bigger weapon, the truth. The morning of the hearing felt like the calm before a violent storm. I stood outside the county courthouse, staring up at the gray stone building, breathing deeply to keep my nerves in check. Michael stood beside me, cool and collected, carrying a thick binder filled with evidence. This is where it starts, Brian, he said, giving me a reassuring nod. Remember, they've already made mistakes. We just have to expose them. Inside the courtroom, Karen sat at the plaintiff's table, perfectly dressed in a sharp navy suit, her expression unreadable. Her attorney, Stanley Price, whispered something in her ear as I took my seat. The judge, an older woman named Judge Ramirez, entered the room and called both parties forward. We are here today for preliminary hearings on Westwood Lakes HOA versus Brian Lewis, she said, adjusting her glasses. I've reviewed both complaints and counterclaims. This case is unusual, to say the least. Stanley stood first. Your Honor, the defendant has refused to comply with HOA regulations repeatedly. His vehicle has been an eyesore, lowering property values and causing distress to multiple homeowners. Judge Ramirez raised an eyebrow. And you felt towing his vehicle from private property without prior court approval was appropriate. Stanley's mouth opened, but Michael immediately stood. Your Honor, the plaintiff not only violated due process, but engaged in personal enrichment by towing the defendant's car through a company owned by the HOA president herself. Michael walked to the center of the courtroom and handed the judge several documents. Here are business filings proving Ms. Whitmore owns Whitmore Recovery Solutions, the same company hired by the HOA to tow Mr. Lewis's vehicle. Judge Ramirez flipped through the pages slowly. The tension in the room thickened. Karen's face reddened for the first time. And you're alleging personal financial gain from these actions? The judge asked. Correct, Michael said. Furthermore, we have evidence of inflated towing fees, fabricated violation notices, and intentional retaliation against Mr. Lewis when he attempted to appeal through the proper channels. Stanley tried to regain control. Your Honor, Mr. Lewis was combative from the start. The HOA simply enforced its rules. Michael didn't flinch. Rules are not above the law. Your Honor, the HOA cannot profit from its own enforcement actions. That's textbook conflict of interest. Judge Ramirez tapped her pen against her desk thoughtfully. This court takes abuse of authority very seriously, she said. I am ordering a full discovery process. All HOA financial records for the last 3 years are to be submitted within 14 days. Additionally, all towing records and communications between Ms. Whitmore and the HOA board must be disclosed. Karen's composure cracked. Her jaw clenched tightly, and for the first time, I saw panic behind her cold, rehearsed mask. As the hearing adjourned, Michael leaned in close to me. They never thought this would go this far, he whispered. Most people break under the pressure. But you didn't. Outside the courtroom, a local news crew was waiting, tipped off by Michael's media contacts. The story was now public. Reporters swarmed Karen as she exited. Ms. Whitmore, is it true you personally profited from towing operations? Did you fabricate violations against Mr. Lewis? Are criminal charges coming? She pushed past them, refusing to answer. But the damage was done. The story was out. The pressure was rising. Later that night, as I sat at home reviewing papers with Michael, my phone buzzed. An anonymous email popped into my inbox. Subject, HOA secrets message. You don't know the half of it. Check the HOA's private fund transfers. Follow the money. I stared at the screen, adrenaline rushing through me. There were even more secrets buried beneath the surface. The anonymous email sat in my inbox like a loaded weapon. You don't know the half of it. Check the HOA's private fund transfers. Follow the money. I forwarded it immediately to Michael. Within minutes, my phone rang. Brian, he said, his voice tense with excitement. If this tip is legit, we may be looking at full-scale financial fraud, possibly even embezzlement. The next morning, Michael filed a motion to expand discovery into the HOA's private funds. Judge Ramirez approved it. Now, not only were we getting towing records, we were also digging into bank statements, wire transfers, and internal HOA financial reports. That's when everything started to unravel. The HOA's financials arrived a week later. Michael and his forensic accountant, a sharp no-sense-woman named Emily, spent hours dissecting every line by evening. Emily looked up from her laptop, eyes wide. This is big, she said. Karen wasn't just profiting from towing. She's been funneling HOA funds into shell companies, property management firms, landscaping services, even consulting fees, all owned by either her or her relatives. Michael added, Brian, this isn't just civil fraud anymore. This is criminal. We compiled a full report and submitted it to both the judge and the district attorney. Suddenly, Karen and the HOA board weren't just fighting a lawsuit, they were facing a criminal investigation, but the next move was theirs. That evening, as I was preparing dinner, I heard a knock at the door. It was late, too late for casual visitors. I opened it cautiously. Standing there was a man I recognized vaguely, Tom Harris, one of the HOA board members. Can I come in? He asked nervously. I hesitated but let him inside. He sat down, looking around anxiously. Listen, Brian. I didn't know how deep this went. I thought Karen was just strict, but it's worse. What do you mean? I asked. She's been threatening board members, forging votes, and falsifying meeting minutes. Anyone who questioned her got fined, harassed, or pushed out of the neighborhood. I tried to walk away last year. She doubled my HOA dues. My wife was terrified we'd lose the house. He pulled a flash drive from his pocket and slid it across my table. These are copies of internal emails, hidden financial records, and private board chats. Karen controls everything, even who gets elected. I stared at the flash drive. This was gold. Why are you helping me now? I asked. Tom's voice cracked. Because you fought back. No one else ever did. You might actually take her down. And I can't live with the guilt anymore. The next day, Michael reviewed the flash drive. This is the nail in the coffin. We added the new evidence to our case. When Karen's lawyer saw the updated filings, his tone shifted dramatically. That afternoon, we received a settlement offer, a large one. They offered to drop all fines, restore my Mustang fully at their expense, pay for legal damages, and issue a public apology if I agreed to keep the financial records private. But I wasn't after money anymore. No deal, I told Michael. I want full exposure. Everyone deserves to know the truth. Michael nodded. Then we push forward. They're running out of moves. Meanwhile, the DA officially opened a criminal probe. Karen's once iron grip on Westwood Lakes was slipping fast. But Karen wasn't finished. A few days later, a brick smashed through my living room window in the middle of the night. Attached was a note. You don't know who you're messing with. Back off. This wasn't just legal now, it was personal. And dangerous. But I wasn't backing down. The brick through my window wasn't just vandalism, it was a message. Karen was growing desperate. The walls were closing in, and she was lashing out. Michael immediately called the police and filed a report. The officer who arrived was sympathetic. You're not the first, he said grimly. We've had a few complaints about harassment tied to the HOA, but no one ever had the guts to take it this far. The next morning, things escalated even further. As I pulled out of my driveway, I noticed my tires were slashed. 3 out of 4, a deliberate move, meant to inconvenience but not prevent me from noticing before I drove off. But the real threat came later that day. A manila envelope arrived, unmarked. Inside were photos of me taken from a distance, at work, at home, even at the courthouse. Attached was a typed note. "You've made your point. Drop the lawsuit or things will get worse." I showed Michael the envelope. "They're watching you closely," he said, jaw tight. "This is turning into criminal intimidation." But just as Karen's tactics grew darker, new allies began stepping forward. Tom Harris wasn't alone. Over the next week, 2 more HOA board members, Linda and Marcus, came forward. Both told nearly identical stories: manipulated votes, fabricated violations, secret bank accounts, and constant threats. Marcus revealed the biggest bombshell, yet the HOA never even legally authorized half the fines they issued. Karen was signing off on them personally, bypassing required board votes. The HOA bylaws were broken repeatedly. With each new testimony, our case grew stronger, not just against the HOA, but against Karen personally. Meanwhile, Judge Ramirez authorized full subpoenas of Karen's personal bank accounts. What we found was staggering. Hundreds of thousands of dollars transferred between HOA accounts, shell companies, and her private savings. She had bled the community dry for years. Michael was relentless. "We'll present all of this at trial. Racketeering, embezzlement, intimidation, abuse of power." Karen could be facing serious prison time. News outlets swarmed the story. Westwood Lake's HOA scandal became headline material. Neighbors who once whispered behind closed doors were now speaking openly, many finally realizing the nightmare they'd silently allowed. Karen, however, wasn't going down quietly. One evening, as I returned home from court preparation, I found my front door ajar. My stomach dropped. I stepped inside cautiously. Drawers were open, papers scattered, but nothing of real value missing. It wasn't a robbery, it was a warning. The police dusted for prints, but Michael was certain. "This is pure intimidation. She's trying to scare you into dropping the case before trial." I refused to break as the trial date approached. Karen made one final move. She attempted to resign from the HOA and flee the state, but by then, the DA had frozen her accounts and issued a hold on her assets. She wasn't going anywhere. Then came the news I had waited for. Criminal charges were officially filed. Karen was arrested, charged with fraud, racketeering, embezzlement, witness intimidation, and obstruction of justice. The empire she built on greed was finally collapsing as she was led into custody, cameras flashing around her. I couldn't help but feel both relief and exhaustion. But the trial wasn't over yet. Now, it was time for full justice in court, for me, for my Mustang, and for every homeowner she had wronged. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, neighbors, and even HOA members who once cowered under Karen's rule now filled the benches. The buzz outside was deafening. Everyone wanted to witness the collapse of Westwood Lake's most feared tyrant. Karen sat at the defendant's table, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. No designer suit could hide the weight of the charges now hanging over her head: fraud, embezzlement, racketeering, intimidation. Her one smug attorney, Stanley Price, looked equally defeated. Flipping through papers without purpose, Judge Ramirez called the court to order. Michael stood and opened our side confidently. "Your Honor, members of the jury, this is not simply a case about a car or HOA regulations. This is a case about systematic abuse of power, illegal enrichment, and criminal enterprise hiding behind the shield of a homeowners association." He detailed Karen's multi-layered operation: the bogus violation notices, the towing company scam, the rigged board elections, and the hidden shell companies funneling money straight into Karen's personal accounts. Then came the witnesses. First, Tom Harris took the stand. He described how Karen manipulated votes and bullied board members. He testified about threats, falsified meeting minutes, and the culture of fear she cultivated. The jury watched him intently, hanging on every word. Next came Marcus and Linda, both echoing the same patterns of corruption and fear. Each testimony added another nail to Karen's legal coffin, but the most explosive moment came when Michael called Emily, our forensic accountant. She walked the jury through bank statements, wire transfers, and shell company records with surgical precision. In total, Emily concluded, Ms. Whitmore illegally diverted over $600,000 from HOA funds for personal gain. Karen shifted uncomfortably, her face pale, then Michael dropped the final bomb. He presented the anonymous email and the flash drive direct. Evidence of Karen's private conversations about silencing board members, falsifying fines, and rigging elections. Screenshots displayed on the projector showed Karen messaging her inner circle, "He won't last. We'll bury him in legal fees and take the house too." The jury gasped. Stanley tried to mount a defense, claiming Karen acted within her legal authority to maintain community standards. But the mountain of evidence was overwhelming. The jury wasn't buying it. Then, Karen made her final mistake. She chose to testify. Under cross-examination, Michael cornered her. "Ms. Whitmore, who authorized the towing of my client's vehicle?" "I did as HOA president." "And who owns Whitmore Recovery Solutions?" She paused. "I do." "And who received $38,000 in towing fees from HOA violations in just 2 years?" Silence. "Ms. Whitmore." Her voice cracked. I did." The courtroom went silent. It was over. Closing arguments were brief. The prosecution laid out its airtight case. The defense had little to say. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood, "We find the defendant guilty on all counts." The room erupted, reporters scrambling, neighbors whispering in disbelief. Karen sat frozen as Judge Ramirez announced the sentence: 15 years in prison, full restitution, and permanent disqualification from holding any HOA office. Finally, after months of battle, justice had prevailed. As Karen was led away in handcuffs, she shot me one last venomous look, but it was powerless now. Outside the courthouse, Michael clapped me on the back. "You did it, Brian. You stood your ground." I looked out at the cameras flashing around us, finally breathing freely. But one more chapter remained, reclaiming my life and my beloved Mustang. With Karen behind bars and the HOA scandal fully exposed, the neighborhood finally began to breathe. Again, the residents of Westwood Lakes, once too afraid to speak out, now held special meetings to reform the HOA from top to bottom. The old board resigned entirely, and a new leadership was elected, one that promised transparency, fairness, and accountability. For the first time in years, Westwood Lakes wasn't a war zone, it was a real community. But my personal battle wasn't quite over. One morning, I stood outside the same impound lot where my Mustang had been dumped months earlier. This time, though it wasn't chained between 2 rusted trucks, my car sat up front, gleaming in the sunlight, fully restored thanks to the court order that forced Karen and the HOA to pay every dime of the repair costs. The scratches, the dents, the chipped paint, all gone. The $56,000 beauty looked even better than when I first bought it. The tow yard manager handed me the keys with an awkward smile. "Never seen anything like this before. You really made a lot of noise." I simply nodded, sliding into the driver's seat, gripping the familiar leather wheel. The engine roared to life, the deep, satisfying rumble of victory. As I drove home, neighbors waved and cheered. People who once avoided me were now offering handshakes and congratulations. One elderly neighbor, Mrs. Fletcher, even brought over a homemade pie later that afternoon. "We all owe you, Brian," she said softly. "You took on a monster. None of us had the courage." "It wasn't just me," I told her. "It was everyone who finally stood up. And now this community has a second chance." But just when I thought the saga was fully behind me, one final surprise arrived. A letter. Not from Karen or the HOA, but from the state attorney's office. Inside was a legal notice. "Due to your assistance in exposing widespread HOA corruption, your case has prompted a statewide investigation into HOA financial abuse." Apparently, our case had become the spark for larger reform. Across the state, multiple HOAs were now under review for similar illegal practices. Michael grinned when I showed him the letter. "You didn't just win for yourself, Brian, you might have just changed the game for thousands of homeowners." A few months later, I was invited to speak at a statewide HOA reform conference. Standing at the podium, looking out at hundreds of homeowners, attorneys, and lawmakers, I shared my story, how a single car, a corrupt board, and one determined fight exposed years of abuse. Homeowners associations were designed to protect communities, I said, but when power is abused, when fear controls good people, corruption flourishes. The only way to break it is to stand up, one person at a time, and demand accountability. The audience erupted in applause as I walked off the stage. Michael met me backstage. You ready to finally enjoy your Mustang in peace now? He chuckled. I smiled. I think I've earned it. That weekend, I took the Mustang on a long, open drive down the coast. No HOA fines, no threats, no corrupt officials standing in my way. Just me, the open road, and the deep roar of freedom. The nightmare was finally over.